to talk about some fall planting bulb tips for you to start to prepare, because you're going to want to order early so that you get the best selection. So that's why we wanted to do this before August, so that you could get your tips together and think about where you're going to plant and what type of plants you'll be needing. So our mission as Extension Master Gardeners are we're volunteers and with Green Spring Gardens and the Virginia Cooperative Extension. And we're dedicated to working for community outreach. So bulb, just a little bit of terminology here for the people who are just going to be working with bulbs for the first time. Maybe this is your first try. And so I wanted to just give you a little bit of background on what a bulb actually is as a definition. So I'll give you a second just to take a look at that. And then we'll talk about bulb selection and what to look for as you purchase these. So here's just some examples of 3 different bulbs: the daffodil, the tulip, and the crocus. And you might be saying to yourself, if you hadn't thought about it, why would I want to plant bulbs? I haven't tried it before, so what would be a good reason? So there's a few reasons. They're low maintenance, deer proof, except for some tulips, one of them, frost resistant, and you're going to get a lot of nice early season color. There's a few types of bulbs. We're going to be talking about spring flowering bulbs, the hardy bulbs, because you want to plant those in the fall so that you can get your early, middle, and late spring blooms. This is a pretty interesting handout from the Almanac, just to give you an idea of how to grow bulbs. So I thought it was a good resource. So I wanted to put this link in for you if you had any questions. It doesn't list all of them, of course, there's just a few, but it does give you a good start on what to look for. Primarily with these bulbs, you'll need well-drained soil, and it's pretty much for almost every bulb you'll see under soil that you have to have adequate drainage. And then it shows you the variety of how deep to plant them, when they'll bloom, and how tall they'll be. So when you select your plants, you want to think about what's the intended purpose that you have. Are you going to use it as a border? Are you looking for height, color variety? Or maybe you want to naturalize your garden and make it look more like nature in irregular clumps, and just scatter them through your landscape. You can do a lot of different things with the bulbs. And they're going to add color and height and a lot of variety to your landscape. So considering flowering times whenever you're making your selection, you want to plant in clusters. First of all, you want plants that will flower together. And then you also want to stagger flowering times so that you've always got a fresh group and different varieties coming up at different times throughout the spring. Up until late spring and middle summer. When you plant this combination, you're going to see a variety of heights and colors throughout your landscape. So some popular spring flowering bulbs are very common: the daffodil, the hyacinth, the tulip, and the crocus. Then you've got some spring shade bulbs. Just another place for you to see the variety of the coloring and the blues and the different shades that you can arrange in your landscape. Hardy bulbs recommended for the DC area is a really interesting handout, and so I did put the link here for you from Fairfax County Parks. It's a really good reference, and so if you want to jot that down. I'm not sure, but I did put a link. I don't know if these are up anywhere, but this is a live link to that site. Where to plant. So you want to think, once you've thought about what type of plants you're looking for, you really need to think, where are you going to put it? For the best viewing, you might want to consider along a walkway that you walk every day so that you can enjoy them. You might want to do something around your mailboxes, even around the base of your trees. You can plant them along the base of a deciduous tree if they're early bloomers, because they'll have time to have enough sunlight before the leaves appear on the trees. You might want to put them in your entryway or make a beautiful border. So there's some considerations for site selection. Light, because most bulbs do need full sunlight. Minimum 5 to 6 hours of direct sunlight per day. If you're going to leave them in the ground, then you want to increase that to about 8 to 10 hours per day. Soil texture. I talked earlier about the importance of good drainage. That was listed in a couple articles as the single most important factor in having success with your bulbs. And then you could think about the function. Say you want to naturalize your area. Then your technique would be to toss the bulbs where they fall. You're going to plant them so that they have that scattered effect. The slope of the site affects the temperature and the drainage. And then think about your soil type, and if you're going to need to add some organic matter to that to make sure that you get that adequate drainage. When you're purchasing bulbs, you have a couple options. You can do it locally at one of the nurseries, or you can do mail order. When the mail orders, a really good mail order nursery is going to ship the bulbs when they need to be planted. Again, you're going to want to order early because you want the best selection. And usually people like to place their order several months in advance. If you purchase them before your planting time, you need to keep them in a cool, dry place. 60 to 65 degrees is the optimal, and you never want to go higher than 70 degrees. Whenever you keep them, they need to be in a ventilated bag. You're going to have them in mesh, or you're going to have them in something that gives good ventilation, a paper bag. You don't want to put them in unventilated plastic bags. Here's what you're going to be looking for when you're in the local nurseries and you're checking the bulbs. First, you want to make sure that you have the appropriate hardiness zone for your climate. Then, whenever you're actually physically looking and feeling these, you're going to look for a plump, and they should be firm to the touch. They shouldn't have any odor. Check for signs of disease and mold or any damage. And with the exception of lilies, you really don't want any obvious root growth or any sprouting. So I have a couple slides about the USDA plant hardiness zone map. And again, Virginia stretches across the hardiness zones. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a look specifically at the Virginia zones. This is the map that's available online from the USDA. And I've blown up the bottom portion of it so that you can see. The Fairfax County zone is 7A. So we're looking at a temperature from 0 to 5 degrees Fahrenheit. For another visual of this is a hardiness zone that another website, just in case you find that one a little difficult to read, this might be a little easier for you to pick up on, and depending upon what zone you're in the state of Virginia. But again, Fairfax is zone 7A. For those of you who are interested in, may have friends or may have other homes in other zones, I just wanted to give an example of the average planting times for spring bulbs in the different zones. So when we're looking at 4 and 5, we're talking September, October. Zone 6 and 7, October to early November. And as you get into the warmer climates, you can go into early December, even as in zone 10 as far as late December. But in these hardiness zones, you're going to have to do some chilling of your bulbs. So we can give you some information on that if you're interested in planting in a warmer climate. So when to plant? We definitely want to plant our bulbs at the appropriate time because that's the best guarantee we're going to get that we're going to have blooms in the spring. So the best time, after the first frost, but before the ground freezes. You want to be able to get that shovel in without difficulty. So the first frost in Northern Virginia, in general, usually occurs from late September to early November. You want to make sure that the roots have a chance to grow because once they're planted, they quickly sprout roots and they're going to settle in for the winter. If you do happen to be late with your bulbs, you may still be able to plant them, but they might just not get the best showing for the first year. When I looked at the Old Farmer's Almanac, I wanted to see what was predicted for the first frost for this year in Virginia. And so it came up with October 22nd. Last first frost days, that's a 30% probability. So they are calculated using climate normals. So just some idea. So sometime, perhaps the middle of October into early November, you're going to want to make sure that you beat that frost freezing. The depth is important. First of all, you really should consult the information that comes with your bulbs. But there's a general rule of thumb. You want to plant 2 to 3 times as deep as the bulb is tall. So for larger bulbs, you might go about 8 inches deep. For the smaller ones, you may need to go only 3 to 4 inches. When you're measuring, you want to be sure that you measure from the bottom of the bulb to the top, to the point. Here's a visual from the online plant guide. And it just gives a few of the bulbs, but it gives you an idea of the soil level for some common bulbs that you might be interested in planting. So your steps for planting. Of course, you want to prepare the site. You want to keep it light. You want to keep that soil aerated. And again, that well-drained soil because you want to prevent rotting. You might need to work compost or peat moss into the top 8 to 10 inches of the soil to help you with your drainage. Then you definitely look at your guidance on that because you want to know the depth that you need to plant before you dig your hole. When you set those bulbs, you're going to set them roots down, pointing side up. After they're set down, you want to gently fill the whole soil, but you don't want to pack it too tightly. It needs to be loose. You're going to water those newly planted bulbs. And then if you need to protect them from rodents, you can do that with cages or wire mesh, maybe chicken wire if you have a problem in your area with rodents. What if you're not sure which end goes up? You want to plant the bulb on its sides. The roots of most bulbs will find their way into the soil. And so if you're unsure, just plant it sideways. We did have a question that came in before the podcast here today. Is it really necessary to dig up bulbs each season? So although most bulbs prefer not to be disturbed, they can be left, but you need to be aware of overcrowding if they're left in for several years. And our master gardeners who are here to answer your questions today have come up with some handouts from Fairfax County that will give you some good information, but it does depend on the particular bulb. But if you notice that they're crowded, you'll know this because they'll be less vigorous. You'll have fewer flowers. That's going to give you some indication that it's time to transplant. So for example, perhaps every 5 years your daffodils and crocus should be dug up and replanted because you want to prevent them from overcrowding. Spring flowering tulips. So with tulips, you might want to have to dig them up every 3 years or so. Once they stop flowering, that's going to be your sign that they need to be dug up. So it really is going to depend, and you're going to be able to look specifically for the type of bulb that you're interested in digging up. But that particular sign of less flowers is going to give you a tip on whether that's overcrowding or not. So all tulips eventually will require digging up and replanting. But again, with the tulips, this doesn't have to be an annual job for you. And then this presentation was more about the hardy but tender summer blooming bulbs do need to be dug up every fall because you want to avoid them dying to winter temperatures. Again, you're going to store any bulbs that you dig up in a well-ventilated space until you can replant them in the spring. And here's just some examples of some tender summer blooming bulbs for you today. Not sure if our master gardeners would like to share at this time, share the handouts that you found on that particular question. Anyone? Okay, I'm going to just share some of the references that I used today from the Virginia Cooperative Extension. There's a couple publications that was a source for information. So I have these for you too, if you'd like to jot this down. If you just jot down the title, it's pretty easy. I tried both by doing the links and by just putting the title to bring it up. And then for the ones that have publication numbers, I have those listed